Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we are going to talk about an announcement coming out of Sony Pictures about the next project for Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg. But before we get to that, I would like to say that tonight we are going to be doing A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 for Rated R Riffs. So come on over to my channel at around 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time to watch that with us. And then now that that's out of the way, we can get to the actual announcement, and that is that Rogen and Goldberg are planning their animated follow-up to 2016 Sausage Party with a movie called Bubble. Now, it's not. This is not an actual sequel. I say spiritual successor in the sense that this is their next foray into the R-rated animated feature realm. So again, it's not an actual sequel. It's just basically kind of like their next project that's in the same kind of a vein as Sausage Party. So this movie itself is based off of something. Now, this was something weird that I found out when looking up information on this. Because when I saw the article, I had no idea what they were talking about when I heard this phrase of a scripted podcast. Now, I'm familiar with podcasts. I watch the Joe Rogan podcast a lot and stuff like that. But a scripted podcast, I didn't realize it's basically just either a radio show or, if you want to call it an audio book, I guess it's just episodic. It's basically just somebody reading you a story. So they're taking this scripted podcast called Bubble, which is off of a site called MaximumFun.org, and it is actually written. It was written and produced by another guy who is also going to be co-writing this with both of them. I assume both of them, because usually Rogen and Goldberg co-write these projects. So he'll be joining in on that, although I don't know what extent that'll be. But it's supposed to be about this world that exists where it's basically like a big metropolitan center that's surrounded by goblins. It's a bubble of, like, hence the word bubble. The title Bubble is it's a bubble of like humanity basically, or just life forms living together, and around it is a bunch of goblins and stuff like that, and monsters, and basically it follows this small group of monster hunters who work in this society where basically everything is contractual. So they don't have industries and stuff like that. Everybody just works on a contract. So like, okay, I want, I'm going to pay you X amount to go do this. So it's basically a quest built society, which is kind of funny. So that is the basic premise of the property. Now, I don't know the necessary tone of the actual podcast. I've never actually listened to it. I just know the description because I've studied it a little bit and looked it up, for the base description, just to see what kind of a feel this could have. But I think you could very easily make it into a comedy if it's or more comedic than it is, if it's a bit more towards the serious side. But basically, it's just supposed to be about the inner workings of these monster hunters and stuff going on. So this might have a bit more action than Sausage Party, which would be kind of a bit of a welcome thing. Sausage Party has that big set piece at the end of it where the food all starts killing the people and stuff like that, and the orgy and stuff. But that stuff, again, it's action, but it's not super action. I feel like this could have a lot of action in it. And maybe you could mingle it into an action comedy, which would be something a bit different from both of those guys, from Rogen and Goldberg, because the last one that I would really qualify as maybe an action comedy would probably be Pineapple Express, because it's basically a chase movie. But all the other ones are basically just kind of, they dabble in genres a bit, from horror to straight comedies to spoofs on stuff like war, not war movies, but spoofs on other things and stuff like that, and not dating movies, but romantic comedies and things like that. So they dabble a little bit, but they don't really go to the same extent as they probably could in this. I think they could bring this really up high, especially because it's about fighting monsters. Now, I don't know if they're actually going to be using the same animation studio. I would assume that it's going to be, since it's coming out of Sony, it's going to be Sony Animation, so I would assume it's the same studio. They're not going to outsource this. But I think that I liked the first one. It was fluid. I liked the style. I thought it was animated pretty well for the most part. There really weren't any. You really couldn't see too much of the seams. There wasn't anything that was really too much of a problem with it. All the textures looked pretty good, and the character models were all pretty good. So I didn't really have too much of a problem with any of it. I do kind of hope they get some of the voice cast back to do this again, like they did with the previous film. With Sausage Party, I shouldn't say previous film because again they're not actually connected from a story perspective. But the previous movie, people like Nick Kroll, Paul Rudd, James Franco, Danny McBride, Craig Robinson, Jonah Hill, Michael Cera, all the usuals that usually kind of get tacked on with Rogen and Goldberg films. So I do hope some of them come back because, again, a lot of them were very funny in the previous film, too, and that kind of also cements it in as the spiritual successor to Sausage Party if you include those people in it. Edward Norton, I don't know if you can get him twice. That might be asking for the stars to align a little bit too much. But, there's a lot of an upside to this, and I really enjoyed Sausage Party. I thought it was a hilarious film, but it's also, I can understand why people maybe don't like the comedy as much. If you're not into the raunchy comedy, the really hard R-rated stuff, if you're not a fan of, a lot of profanity and things like that, then I can understand you not liking the comedy. You're more of a Jerry Seinfeld type as opposed to a Richard Pryor or a George Carlin. And we all have those kind of pluses and minuses. And I know that Sausage Party kind of got hit for that a little bit when it came out. Was that it was it was too profane. It was too too raunchy and stuff like that. But for a little bit anyway, again for an animated feature because it was kind of the first one of its kind. So well, at least in 3D animation, I should say that. There's been very raunchy 2D animations. But as far as 3D animation goes, it was really kind of the first one. But I think that now that audiences kind of got used to that, I don't think this one's going to have as much of a problem from critics anyway of being criticized about that. And I think that too, you might see it toned down a little bit in this. Depending on how much studio meddling is involved, because again, it is Sony Pictures, so usually they kind of let those two guys do what they want for the most part. Again, they pretty much let them do whatever the hell they wanted with Sausage Party. So it's not really that shocking that they might do the same thing with this, but it's a different animal. It feels like a different animal because again, you're still in the realm of fantasy either way, but the stories feel very night and day from one another. Where the Sausage Party is basically just a giant commentary on why religion is dumb, or they make the argument that religion is dumb, basically, or religion is a lie, and they make it hilarious because they just relate it back to food, and then you go to this where I don't know if you can twist it in that sense, but and here's the other thing too is that I know Rogen and Goldberg have definitely gone down the woke street, I guess you could call it, at least in the last few years. But at the same time, I have to trust them to an extent because of their past work. So I'm not going to condemn it just because it's them. And again, I like a lot of it. I would say probably a majority of the movies that they've done. There are ones that I think suck, but like I said, Sausage Party is probably my favorite one that either of them have done. And then you also have stuff like Pineapple Express, which is hilarious. This is the End is hilarious. This is the End is probably my second favorite. I do love that movie. I think it's hilarious because they're just playing over the top, insane versions of themselves. But I think there's a lot of upside to this going forward, and I actually do want to see what comes of this if they do wind up making this film and it gets off the ground. But I also want to know what you think. Are you a fan of Rogen and Goldberg? Do you like some of their films? If so, which ones? And if you don't, you can say, I just don't like either one of them. And how do you feel about this property being adapted, and do you think it could be adapted successfully, again, like the previous film, at least in terms of financial success? Like I said, I want to know your thoughts, so put them in the comments below. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?